Hello, everyone. Good. Well, today I'm here to talk about ways to architecture your Vue.js application or Nuxt application, depending what you use. And you can see right here that it's by Geisy Domiciano, because it's basically from my experience or learnings in my career, and it's nothing that it's like a rule or written in documentation or anything like that, okay? Just to make sure. My name is Geisy Domiciano. You can call me Geisy. It's gonna work. You're gonna get a 200 as a response. That's me with a little bit of more hair. I swear it's here as well. I'm originally from Brazil, but currently I live in Sweden. I'm there for almost 1 year and a half. Yes. And I'm the chapter leader for Vue Vixens in Sweden. I'm the representative there, so I have the focus of giving workshop and free learning for women so they can start a career with Vue.js as a front-end developer. And I'm also a front-end developer at Daniel Wellington. It's a fancy watch. You might have heard about it or seen around. So that's where I work. First of all, what is Vue and Nuxt? Which one of you have never heard about Nuxt.js? Okay, few people. And never heard about Vue. Okay, so we are cool with the first one. So I will just pass the description because everyone has heard about it. You can go to the documentation if you want to see something. And regarding Nuxt, it's basically a higher level framework built on top of Vue, but it's like a production ready framework. So it's kind of prepared to you actually use it in your company, not only do your side projects. So it comes with it Vue router already working and implemented, so you can just put files inside a folder and the routing is going to appear automatically. It has integration with Vuex as well for the store and all the benefits with it, so you have already namespaced modules and stuff, also adding folders or files with the name of the module you want to work with. You have the gain of server-side rendering when you want to have the SEO for your website or make your pages being rendered at the first on the server and then served in the client. And you also have, a good integration with PWA, so you can start your PWA app and make all the configuration through Nuxt in an easier way than what you do with Vue. You have one config file for all the libraries. Most likely to use any of those, you use just the Nuxt config file, so you don't have to actually configure all the roots. You don't have to configure, I don't know. I don't know, because I use Nuxt for so long now that I don't even remember what we configure in Vue, but usually you have to do configuration for each thing, so you're going to do everything in one file. The modules will be easier to export and deal with them. And you have automatic code splitting, the way that you do based on the page and the folder structure. So they know when you have a page and the components that go there. So they will build the CSS scope, everything according to your structure. And you have this standard folder structure that comes from it that will be be reproduced in this image that it is in the documentation. The link is right there. So Nuxt will take care of your document, so your HTML file as basic, the HTML5 structure. And then you have the layout, and the layout is basically like your structure of the page. So header and footer would go inside the layout. If all of your pages, they will have header and footer. And you can have multiple layouts. So maybe the login page does not have a header and a footer, and then it's a different layout to be applied. Your error also is going to be a different layout. The page, it's going to be that component that actually is going to be rendered as your main, in your main tag, what written HTML would be. So that's the main, and the page contains like child page components, and then children, and then its components, and then we know how it is, right? Clear? Thumbs up? Cool. So it makes sense, right? To use Nuxt at first. So in real life, since when I started working with Vue 2 years ago, 2.5 years maybe, we started with Vue and then we decided to change. So framework, we decided to just jump into Nuxt, even though before the version 1. It was a little risky, but it worked. The origin of code can always vary from a new code, you're building a new application, or you're migrating from a legacy platform with another front-end framework or back-end framework, which can make a little bit difficult or easier to build your components, because maybe you have more room or less room to work with the legacy. You need to think about like who is maintaining it. It's a team, it's you, but if you're in a company, you're kind of a team of yourself. But still, like, sometimes you're going to have more people hired. You need to expect that the company is going to scale, because if they scale, you get more money. So yeah, let's think that the company is going to scale. And also regarding API, you need to think if your API is going to be internal or external, because when it is internal, you can just ask, you can go to the backend guys and say, hey, can you return an object instead of an array here, or do something? When it's external, you don't have this ability. And I'm going to assume here that everyone is going to use Vuex. Is Vuex clear for everyone? OK. Just you replied, but I will get your answer. So one thing that when you start, you have so many options, and then you go to the documentation, and you see this implementation in most of the examples, that each component minds its business, which means they are allowed, which they are, in theory, to request, send, and manipulate data. Yeah, what this means. It means that you have a page. The blue there is a page. I hope you can see because it's light. It's good back there. Nice. So you have the page, and then you have several components, and then you have your store. And then right there, your page makes requests, your components makes requests, and they expect some data, and they deal with that data. And every time you have any user interaction, they are going to make their own request because they know which data they are supposed to do. And then it's like, yeah, you look into the examples, you see a lot of components from any point of the application accessing the store. And then you're like, yeah, OK, because I don't have to use a lot of props here. So I have, again, where I don't use a lot of props. I don't use event bus at all. I don't need to control who is sending or not the information, because my button knows. But then you have a problem, because if you want to use the same button, you're going to have a really logic there to identify where that click comes from, inside the button, or maybe outside. You're going to send a prop, but it's still the button will have to know which action is supposed to actually dispatch. Or you're going to have two buttons. And then you're going to have like either a lot of components, or components that will have a lot of logic that they should be generic and they kind of not. But it is very common when we see sample codes or POCs using this approach. And works. They can access everything. But yeah, after a while, you look at the code. If you try it in work, it's going to be like that. I've been there. Not good. Don't recommend it. So, and then you're like, yeah, I don't like this idea of everyone knowing any information. I want to just flip. And then you say, my page is going to know everything. All of my components are dumb now. They are just presentational. So my page is the only one based on the given context that will be able to request or send or manipulate the data, and then pass it down in props to my components. Big mistake. What was it? I got my page. It's the only one that actually communicates and receives something back. And then it passes it down to every component. And this actually like works OK when you have literally two-level components. If you go any further than that, that's what's going to happen. You're just like, I don't know anymore where this comes from. And then you cannot even validate that data because, oh, you can pass objects, and then you just send the object to the last component. Yeah, validate that object, because just pass it down. So you have to validate in the very first one, because you cannot validate later on. Yeah, that's the end result of it. And then you're like, okay, nothing worked so far. Let's try to be a little bit more cool with it. So I'm going to make sure that my page requests the data, because my page knows which data is supposed to be loaded. And based on the very first screen, it's the one that it is also supposed to use the fetch, even though you can use in other places. And then I will give to the very first element, the page child, the opportunity to actually retrieve the result of that data, which means just access my store, map the state, or map the getters, and then pass it down. And then you have a little better implementation here, because your page will communicate, and they will just send requests or new actions to modify the data. And then your store will just be a provider of information for your first child components, or your page first child. And that's cool, because now your button can be generic. You can use your button everywhere, because their parent are the ones that know what is supposed to happen. So anytime any action is retrieved from the button, so I don't know, a click, and then it's going to send to its parent, and then it's going to send back to the page, because the page is the one that actually can send data, and then it's like event busting. And you kind of just flipped from the last one, so instead of having everything here, now you have everything here. Yeah, I did not use this approach, but based on the other two experiences, we're like, yeah, I don't think it would be the best yet, especially because at work the scope changes and we cannot control it that much. But even though with this approach, you kind of know who is responsible for just managing the data and who is responsible for retrieving. So you get a little bit of responsibility right here, and you can place more things and have more generic stuff. So your components, they will be able to be reusable at least. So you have generic components as a gain. And then it's like, yeah, you know, I can live with that when my application is not high in complexity, such as an e-commerce. So if you just have a website, you are going to render some data, and then you, I don't know, you have one register form, like really small iterations when you don't have complex flow. We will not actually need that many places where you're going to go back to the page. So you're not going to have this huge amount of event buses, right? Usually. Yeah. But and then you go to e-commerces, you know, and then e-commerces is a crazy thing, because you have everything going on in the page. You have the products going on, you can add to the cart, you can search, you can access the amount of products that you are changing, you can change the collection, you can do everything. And then currently, we are using this approach where the page is responsible for requesting all the global information that is going to be used, and they can manipulate in some cases. So, for example, if I need to show, I don't know what I would need to show in a page level, but any message that comes from a data, maybe the categories, I would show them in the page and manipulate that data or something like that. And I have containers, and see that now I'm talking about containers and not page child anymore, because the page child, using them as the only ones that can access any data that comes from the store, kind of limited me to only shifting from the second approach to just going one level down. So instead of having 3 levels of components, passing props, I'll have 4. But it's still not so manageable. So here, what can happen, because and then it's going to vary according to your project, your approach, your team, and everything, your scope. Sorry for the little thing there. So what's going to happen here, it's like the containers, they can use the context inside a page that should have logic, and they can actually communicate with the store. But they are not used everywhere. It's just when they are highly required, because I have my page that will get all my categories. They are aware of all my categories, but the page actually, it can be aware of all the products inside of each category, but I can not show all the categories at first. So I have just the collection list inside a category that I can request later on, because its categories knows its collections. I'm talking about an API that I know how it comes from, because that's the point about you need to understand how your API works as well, to understand how you're going to implement this and see which one is going to be the best approach for your solution. And then there, my API, I have an extra API that can get all my collections, so I don't need to require them in a page level. I can require them in a context level of collections. And then each collection has a list of different product images, product colors, product sizes, or whatever I have to learn to load. And then just this interaction here, it's actually going to be props or event buses, because based on this interaction, I will modify the state or the mode of the container. So it's kind of like you open the door to do a little bit of more modification. So you open the door to get to the first approach that I showed, and then it's about you thinking how you're going to maintain this code. Another approach that also can happen in this same, another situation that can happen in the same approach, you have there the product selection, the header. The product selection is a page, the header, and inside you have that cart dialog that shows the little bag with how many items you have, and then it opens. So why should the page be aware of what's going on inside the cart? That is another context, even though it's inside that page like that. So you can just isolate and use the modules inside the store to isolate all those actions and just communicate to a specific container. And you can make the communication between the last screen, because you're going to add that product to the cart, to the actually just access the store and add to the cart. And the cart is going to have its own list and its own information. When you add an amount, remove it, or just visualize, click in the product, again, you do this communication here. You don't have to actually send it back to the root of the page. But after choosing this, that's how my team and we are. And then it's like, yeah, are you sure? Because it's so much room for so much things go wrong, right? Now, because it's a lot of containers to manipulate, you need to really understand what you're doing. Yeah. And those are the takeaways that I got from after passing by all those situations. So, first of all, those are not rules. You're going to go to different companies, they will have different approaches, and sometimes you need to respect, or you can reset it later on, if you have the power to do so. You always need to think about scalability and maintainability. And in few of the companies that I worked with Vue, there were a problem when people don't actually know what they want, but they're like, tomorrow I have this product page, and tomorrow I want my user to be able to just put their addresses while they're selecting the product. And then what? And then I add the address container, because if I need that address to be somewhere else, I have a container that I can reuse, because it mines the address and not the product selection page that will have an address. I don't know why. You need to make sure that all developers are on board with the approach that you are deciding. That's the base rule, because if someone is not happy, they're not going to develop it well. And then they are just going to say, like, I don't like this. I'm just going to do my pull request and it will never be approved. And then it's a war inside your team. So you need to make sure to decide with your team, if you have a team, of course, or leader, tech lead or something like that. Decide with them what is the best approach for your solution, because all of those were used I did not use the third one, but the other three one I used, and they worked for different projects because they had different purposes. Exceptions can happen. It's good to keep this in mind because nothing is set in stone. Sometimes we create agreements with our team, and then you tend to be, not you necessarily, but someone might be like, but we said that we're not going to do it. You know, there are exceptions. The thing about exception is not making the exception a rule. If you can do that, it's good, because you will be able to create a maintainable and scalable application. Another thing that I learned is that it's really nice to have UI aligned to the way you're building your components. I know it's not possible in every company. However, if you can have them aligned to you, if they're using, for example, the atomic design, you can just create your components in the same way. So what they call moleculars is going to be your generic components. And when they go for the other level that I don't remember right now, it's going to be your composites. And then containers, because there will be some logic and behaves that will interact with actual data, will depend on the data. So if you can have UI, UX designers by your side, do it. And another thing that's really good is to be able to communicate with your backenders. And if you cannot communicate with your backenders, try to make sure that you have a good documentation. So you don't have, I don't know, you're going to have a select component that every time you get data for a select, they're going to come in different ways, and then it's going to be difficult for actual select to be generic, for example. That's one thing. And make sure that you keep your sanity. That's important. And that's all for today. Thank you very much for your time.